The night my husband stepped away from our table to take a phone call, an elderly woman at the next table leaned across and pressed a small, laminated photograph into my hand. I looked down. A younger woman, early 30s, smiling at the camera with her arm around a silver-haired man I knew very well. The silver-haired man was my husband. He had the same smile he'd given me at our City Hall ceremony 6 weeks earlier. "His name is Harlan Doyle," the woman whispered. Her voice was remarkably steady for someone whose hands were shaking so badly. "That woman in the picture is my daughter. Her name was Becky. 2 years ago, she married him. 8 months after the wedding, a park warden found her at the base of a cliff in Algonquin. He told the police she slipped. She stopped, swallowed. She was a trained hiker. She'd been hiking since she was 8 years old." I couldn't speak. I was 63 years old, and I had seen enough of life to know the difference between a woman telling the truth and a woman inventing one. This woman was telling the truth. "I've been watching him for 14 months, she continued, never raising her voice above a murmur. Our table was near the back of the restaurant, a mid-priced Italian place on King Street in Hamilton. Not fancy, just the kind of place my husband had suggested because he said he liked the pasta, and I'd been charmed by the ordinariness of it. "When I saw him walk in with you tonight, I followed. I need you to do something. Right now, before he comes back from that phone call. Get up, go to the ladies' room, and do not come back to this table. Call a cab from inside. I will wait for your message." She pressed a business card into my hand alongside the photograph. "My name is Opal. I'm at the number on the card." And then she sat back and lifted her wine glass as if nothing had happened. I sat very still. My chicken piccata was going cold. There was a small tea light candle in a glass holder on the table, and I watched the flame for a moment because it was the only thing in my field of vision that felt real. Let me tell you who I was before that evening, so you understand what was at stake. I spent 32 years as a librarian at our local branch, first as a cataloging assistant, then as head of reference, eventually as branch manager until I retired at 61. My husband of 27 years, my real husband, died of a sudden heart attack the winter before I retired. He was shoveling the driveway on a February morning and was gone before the ambulance reached us. After that, I rattled around the house alone. My daughter lives out in Kelowna with her family and visits when she can, but visits are not the same as company. I had my books. I had my walking group. I had the vegetable garden my mother started and I'd kept going for 30 years, but evenings were long. My husband, Harlan, appeared at a library fundraiser the following spring. He was charming in a way that didn't feel aggressive. He didn't flatter me. He listened to me, and there is a particular loneliness that makes that difference feel enormous. He remembered, 3 weeks later, that I took my coffee dark roast with no sugar, and he showed up at the branch one afternoon with 2 cups from Tim Hortons, just 'cause he'd been passing by. I thought, this is a good man. We married 6 weeks before that dinner, a small civil ceremony at City Hall, just us and 2 witnesses. He said he didn't want a fuss. I thought that was sensible. I was 63 years old. I agreed that fuss felt beside the point. The house, my parents' house, a 100-year-old red brick on a quiet street in Ancaster, was mine outright. My mother left it to me when she passed. It was not a grand house, but it was paid for, and it was worth something in today's market. I also had a TFSA I'd been building for decades, $82,000, give or take, sitting safely at my bank. That was the whole of what I had, and I thought it was enough. 3 weeks into our marriage, my husband brought home a folder of papers on a Sunday evening. We were watching something on television. He set the folder on the coffee table and opened it with the ease of a man doing something routine. "Just administrative things," he said. "Adding you to my insurance, getting the address change filed for the registry. Some of it needs both our signatures because we're married now." He had a pen ready. He'd tabbed the signature lines with those little adhesive arrows. I remember thinking how organized he was, how considerate it was not to make a production of it. I signed. I didn't read carefully. I trusted him. And I want to be honest about that because it matters. I made a choice, and part of the work of what came after was living with the knowledge that I had. Now I sat in a Hamilton restaurant with a photograph of my husband and a dead woman, and a business card that said Opal Sterling, retired educator, and a phone number. I picked up my purse. I set my napkin beside my plate. I walked to the ladies' room. Inside, I locked the door and sat on the closed lid of the toilet, the full absurdity of it, 63 years old and hiding in a restaurant bathroom, and I called a cab through the app on my phone. 8 minutes. I texted Opal's number. "I'm in the washroom. Cab coming. What do I do?" Her reply came within 30 seconds, side exit near the kitchen. "Go now. I'll keep an eye on the front." I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for one moment, the face of a woman who had believed she was happy. And then I went through the side exit and stood in the alley beside the restaurant's recycling bins until a silver sedan pulled up and I got in. I told the driver to take me home. That was my first mistake. When I reached my street and saw my house, the red brick with the maple by the front walk that I'd grown up climbing, the porch light was off. I always left the porch light on. I noticed it the way you notice a picture hanging crooked, a small wrong thing inside a larger wrong. I put my key in the deadbolt. It went in halfway and stopped. Something was lodged in the cylinder. I tried the lower lock. Same. I stood on the porch in the October cold and understood in a very practical and terrible way that I was standing outside a house that was no longer mine to enter. I did not panic on the porch. I walked back down the front path, got out my phone, and called the one person whose number I found without thinking. My friend who I'd worked beside for over 20 years at the library, who had retired the same spring I did, and who lived 15 minutes away on the other side of the mountain. She answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. "I need you," I said. "Come," she said. That was it. 30 years of friendship compressed into 2 words. I sat at her kitchen table while she made tea. Proper tea, none of those thin envelope bags. She kept a good tin of Murchie's No. 10 blend, and I told her everything. Opal's card, the photograph, the Sunday evening papers I'd signed at the coffee table without reading. When I finished, she said, "Let me see your banking app." I handed her my phone. She navigated to it with the efficiency of someone who had cataloged thousands of library records and understood the architecture of organized systems. She frowned. "Your checking account is showing a restriction flag," she said. "And your TFSA." She put the phone face down on the table. "It says, temporarily restricted request filed by a joint account holder in connection with a suspicious activity report. You don't have a joint account holder." "I do now," I said, "those papers." We sat with that for a moment. "Call Opal," she said. Opal Sterling arrived at 10:30. She was in her mid-70s, small and straight-backed with silver hair cut sensibly short, and she brought a manila envelope that she set on the kitchen table between us. "I've been building this for 14 months, she said, "since they closed Becky's case." She spread the contents of the envelope across the table, photocopied documents, handwritten notes, printouts of property registry entries. After the investigation concluded, accident, they said. I started looking at the paper trail. Becky's condo in Oakville had been transferred to him 6 weeks before she died. She told me it was for tax purposes, something a lawyer had suggested. She didn't have a lawyer. He arranged it. I looked at the property transfer document. The address was in Oakville. The transferring party was Harlan Doyle. How did he do it so cleanly? I asked. Opal's face shifted. His mother. She explained it then, steadily the way a retired teacher explains something complicated, making sure the foundational piece is understood before the next one goes down. Lavinia Doyle had worked for the Provincial Land Registry Office for 31 years. She had retired as Senior Land Registration Officer, one of the most senior administrative positions in the office, responsible for overseeing the processing and authenticity of property transfer documents across the region. She knew the systems, the forms, the verification protocols, and more crucially, she still knew the people. She had mentored half the current staff. She retained honorary visiting status at the office and still occasionally consulted on complex historical files. She can make a fraudulent transfer look like a correctly processed legitimate one, Opal said. She knows which codes to attach, which officer's desk it needs to cross, which fields to populate so an audit won't flag it. She has done this before. Not just with Becky. She tapped one of the pages on the table. I found 6 others before your name appeared. 6, I stared at the page, 6 entries, names and property addresses and dates. Under the last entry, a date 2 weeks old, an address in Ancaster, my parents' house. There is a private office she still uses at the land registry building, Opal said. A small room they allow her for consulting work. I have reason to believe she keeps records there. Real ones. The kind she would never put into the official system. She paused. Her former assistant, a young woman who worked with her for 3 years before Lavinia retired, she left afterward because she saw something she couldn't account for. She didn't understand it fully at the time. She does now. She doesn't want to come forward officially. She's frightened. But she gave me a key. She placed it on the table, a small brass office key, the kind that fits an internal door. My friend looked at me. I looked at the key. We'd be entering a provincial government building without authorization, I said. The building is open to contracted cleaning staff after hours, Opal said. The side entrance from the parking lot stays unlocked until 1 in the morning. I've confirmed this. I picked up the key. We went at midnight. The land registry building was a blocky 1970s structure on York Boulevard, lit by exterior lamps that made the concrete look greenish and cold. We parked 2 streets over and walked. The parking lot side entrance was unlocked, as Opal had said. We slipped inside behind a woman pushing a supply cart who held the door without looking back at us. Lavinia's consulting office was on the 2nd floor, halfway down a corridor of humming fluorescent lights. Opal had the room number memorized. I put the key in the lock. My hands were steadier than I expected. There are certain moments in life when the body simply decides it is done, being afraid, and gets on with the work. The lock turned. Inside was a small, spare room, a desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf with binders arranged by color and year. Everything precisely ordered, the kind of order that comes from decades of professional habit. On the wall, a framed photograph of Lavinia Doyle shaking hands with a provincial minister at some ceremony, and beside it a shadow box containing an award medallion. We searched carefully and quietly. The filing cabinet was locked. The desk drawers held nothing unusual: forms, a stapler, a container of paper clips. Opal was standing at the bookshelf when she stopped. "Look at this," she said very quietly. The binders were arranged by year and color, red, blue, green, alternating. But one binder had been placed spine inward, the pages facing out, the spine hidden. It was a dark burgundy that almost matched the red binders on either side of it. If you weren't looking for the anomaly, you wouldn't see it. But I had spent 32 years putting books back on shelves, and a spine facing the wrong way is something you notice the way you notice a wrong note in a familiar song. She took it off the shelf and set it on the desk. Inside, in handwriting so neat it almost looked typeset, was a record. Each page was divided into columns: a property address, a name, a date, a disposition code, a final status. The final status column used single words: completed, completed, pending, completed, and beside some entries, in the narrow margin, a word that wasn't a property term at all: resolved. I counted the entries. 7. My property address was the 8th, incomplete. The status beside it read, in progress. Those 2 words, in progress, written in neat, unhurried handwriting. My house, my mother's house, my life, an unfinished item on a to-do list. I looked at Opal. She was looking at a name further up the list. I didn't need to ask which one it was. I took out my phone and photographed every page. The lighting was poor and my hands had started shaking, but I went through each page twice to make sure nothing was blurred. We were nearly finished when we heard footsteps in the corridor. Not the loose shuffle of cleaning staff. These were deliberate, fast, purposeful steps. Opal slid the binder back onto the shelf, spine inward, exactly as she'd found it, and pulled me toward the only other door in the room. A narrow closet holding a coat rack and a folded step stool. We got inside. Opal pulled the door closed behind us just as the outer door opened. I heard my husband's voice. "She was here," he said. "Someone used the key." A pause. She's had time to take photographs." His voice was flat and technical in a way I had never heard before, because the voice I'd known for 8 months had been warm and unhurried and full of small kindnesses. This voice was a different instrument entirely. A second voice, older, a woman's, said, "Then we move tonight. The transfer on the Ancaster property is clean. The accounts are frozen. There is nothing she can present that won't look like the confusion of a woman having a breakdown." That was the first time I heard Lavinia Doyle speak in her real register. Not the gracious, measured tone she used in public. The tone of someone accustomed to making decisions in rooms where no one is watching. They left after 4 minutes. We listened to their footsteps retreating down the corridor. Opal opened the closet door. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as resolve. Not excitement, not fear, just the face of a woman who has been waiting a very long time for a door to open. "There is a gala tomorrow evening," she said, "at the Burlington Convention Center, the Ontario Land Registry Association annual service recognition dinner. Lavinia Doyle is receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award. The minister is presenting it. There will be press." I already knew what she was going to say. "Go," she said. "I will stay behind and make sure they cannot leave this building tonight without answering questions." "Opal." "I know what I'm doing," she said. "I've been waiting 14 months. Go." I went. I did not sleep. I sat at my friend's kitchen table and sent the photographs from my phone to 3 places: her email address, my daughter's email in Kelowna, and the address of a journalist whose byline I'd seen in the Hamilton Spectator on a piece about property fraud the previous year. I wrote the journalist a message that was 6 sentences long and as factual as I could make it. In the morning, I went to a print shop on King Street and printed 5 complete sets of the binder photographs on the best quality paper they had. I arrived at the Burlington Convention Center at 6:15 in the evening and borrowed clothes. My friend had lent me a gray blazer that was a size too large, with a tote bag over my shoulder and a folder tucked inside it. I looked exactly like what I was, a retired librarian who had been awake for 36 hours. I had stopped worrying about how I looked approximately 12 hours earlier. The gala was well attended. Round tables draped in white linen, name placards, a lectern with a provincial seal. The kind of room that radiates institutional confidence, the confidence of people who have spent long careers inside systems that mostly work, and who have never had reason to stand outside one looking in. I found a seat near the end of the 3rd row on the aisle. Lavinia Doyle was already at the head table, composed and gracious in a deep blue dress, speaking quietly to the person beside her. Harlan was not there. I had expected that. I sat through 2 presentations. I watched the minister take his place at the lectern. I stood up. A man beside me said, "Excuse me," and I said, "I'm sorry in the way you say it when you mean it as courtesy rather than apology," and I walked to the front of the room. I don't know what I looked like from the audience's perspective. Probably alarming. A woman in an oversized blazer with a folder under her arm, walking uninvited toward the lectern of a formal provincial ceremony. One of the event staff moved to intercept me, and I held up my folder and said, in the carrying voice I had developed over 32 years of managing a public library, "I need 60 seconds. I have documentation of criminal fraud committed by the woman being honored tonight, and I need 60 seconds." It is a remarkable thing, 60 seconds. It is both nothing and everything. The minister stepped back. Whether it was something in my voice, or the folder, or simply the stillness of someone who has made up her mind, I don't know. I put my papers on the lectern. "My name is not important," I said. "What is important is this." I held up the first printed page, the cover of the binder photographs, the columns clearly visible. "This is a record of property fraud orchestrated over a minimum of 7 years, facilitated by manipulation of provincial land registry systems, and resulting in the death of at least one person whose case was ruled accidental and closed." I looked directly at Lavinia Doyle. Her face was very still. The person who maintained this record is the woman being honored this evening. The room went very quiet in the way rooms do when people cannot decide whether to be outraged or riveted. I read 3 entries aloud. I read the property addresses and the names and the dates and the single-word dispositions. I read Becky Sterling's entry, her Oakville condominium, date of transfer, the word resolved in the margin, and I said, Becky Sterling was 34 years old. She fell from a cliff in Algonquin Provincial Park 8 months after her marriage to Harlan Doyle. Her mother has been trying to reopen that case for 14 months. These documents are the reason the case should be reopened. I laid the folder on the lectern. I stepped back. In the 3rd row, I saw the journalist I'd emailed the night before. She was already standing, phone recording. Lavinia Doyle rose from her seat. She was composed. I'll give her that. She used the words unfortunate and clearly in distress, and I waited for her to finish, and then I said, "There are 4 additional sets of these documents. One is already with a journalist. One is with my daughter, who is a paralegal in British Columbia, and one has been received by the Hamilton Police Service Major Crimes Unit, to whom I sent it at 6 this morning. 2 officers from the Provincial Financial Crimes Unit who had been copied on the journalist's query were already in the building. They had attended the gala for reasons they declined to specify publicly. I didn't know that until afterward. What I can tell you is what I saw. Lavinia Doyle was escorted from that room without her Lifetime Achievement Award, and the blue dress she wore that evening was the last elegant thing she put on as a free woman for a very long time. Harlan was located that same night at a hotel off the QEW, 40 minutes south of Burlington. He had checked in that afternoon with a bag already packed. The full record in the Burgundy binder named 7 completed property transfers connected to relationships he had cultivated and ended over 9 years. Of the 7 corresponding individuals, 3 had died in circumstances now under reinvestigation. 4 were alive and had been searching for legal remedies for years, unable to make headway against documents that appeared, on every official surface, to be completely legitimate. Opal's daughter Becky was number 5 in that ledger. The case was formally reopened. My house was restored to my name through an emergency court order 3 weeks later. The fraudulent restrictions on my TFSA and my checking account were reversed. Standing in the front hall of my parents' house, my house, on a gray November afternoon with a cup of tea cooling in my hand, I tried to locate what I was feeling and found it was something more complicated than simple relief. Not triumph. Something quieter than either. I thought about all the forms I'd signed without reading. I thought about the pen with the little adhesive arrows and how charming I'd found the efficiency of it. What I know now that I wish someone had told me at any point before that October evening. Love should not cost you your rights. A person who loves you does not need to hold your house, your accounts, your independence as a condition of the relationship. If anyone, and I mean anyone, no matter how kind they have seemed, no matter how much warmth they have shown you in the cold stretches of your life, if anyone asks you to sign something and gently discourages you from reading it first, put the pen down. Find your own lawyer. One you found yourself, not one they suggested. That is not a small thing to say. It is the whole thing. I still have the business card Opal pressed into my hand that October evening at the restaurant. I keep it in the small dish on the front hall table where my mother used to keep her house keys. Some days I look at it and I think about all the things that happen in the space of a single phone call, how much of a life can be dismantled and how much can be saved in the time it takes a man to step away from a table and come back. He didn't come back to that table, as it turned out. I was already gone.